I wonder if you do think it was a mistake, or do you think President Trump is a racist?
Well, I think, listen, from the standpoint of it being a mistake, it was a mistake as it relates to the notion that you would post something like this, a racist video targeting President Obama and Michelle Obama, both of whom are incredible, patriotic, compassionate Americans. As I've indicated, the best of what this country is all about. He continues to go after them and target them in ways that are unexplainable, other than the fact that he's just jealous and envious of their success, their eloquence, their brilliance, and their professionalism, the exact opposite of the manner in which he conducts himself.
The leader, do you believe that Donald Trump is a racist?
Well, what I've said about the president is, look, if the guy is not a racist, he's certainly doing the best job that he can trying to convince us otherwise as it relates to his behavior and the manner in which he's conducted himself repeatedly for decades.
Meanwhile,
this disgusting video posted by the so-called president was done intentionally. Donald Trump and his vile, racist, and malignant behavior. This guy is an unhinged bottom feeder. President Obama and Michelle Obama are brilliant, caring, and patriotic Americans. They represent the best of this country. It's time for John Thune, Mike Johnson, and Republicans to denounce this serial fraudster who's sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue pretending to be the President of the United States.
What's up, family? So this guy can curse, but he can't answer the question is as if he see or calls Donald Trump racist. And what blows my mind is the simple fact that we have voted for President Donald J. Trump to be president is because he tell it how it is instead of this non-cynical word solid nonsense. This guy can never answer a question. He's like a bot. So get into that because he really pisses me off. We got to talk about failing, and I mean failing loudly, failing publicly, and failing in 4K HD. Because Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, yeah, Timo Obama, Discount Obama, Dollar General version of Obama, he's basically the off-brand version with no swag, is about to get smacked in the face with reality by a poll that's been going absolutely viral. And this poll basically exposes what a lot of regular, everyday Americans already know and feel in their gut, which is that when it comes to election integrity, the American people are way more aligned with Republicans and Trump than Democrats want to admit. And before anybody starts clutching their pearls, let me break this down in plain English for the people in the back or who don't live and breathe politics, right? Because this ain't complicated at all. The poll shows that something like damn near 90% of Americans support voter ID, meaning they believe you should have to show some form of identification to vote, the same way you need an ID to buy alcohol, get on a plane, pick up a package, rent a car, start a job, drive a car of your own with, license and registration, sticker, to make sure your car is up to par maintenance wise to be on the road in some states when it comes to the inspection sticker, or even to get in a club. That's probably already half empty. And the reason this matters is because voting is supposed to be one of the most important things you do in a democracy. So the idea that you need less verification to vote than you do to buy a beer just doesn't make sense to normal people, right? And on top of that, most Americans also believe that citizenship should be verified when you register to vote, which again sounds like common sense because voting is for citizens, just like jury duty is for citizens, just like certain jobs and benefits are for citizens. And yet somehow this basic idea gets treated like it's radical or evil or oppressive when Democrats talk about it. And that's where the disconnect happens. Because this is one of those rare political issues where it's not left versus right or Democrat versus Republican. It's politicians versus regular people. And the regular people are saying, hey, we just want to know the system is secure. Because when people lose faith in elections, they stop trusting the entire system. And when that happens, the country starts cracking at the foundation. And here's the part Democrats don't want to say out loud, or Hakeem Jeffries don't want to say out loud, on top of his other Democrat friends, is basically walks himself into admitting their own base supports voter ID, the Democrats, meaning even Democrat voters, even independents, even people who do not like Trump are basically saying, yeah, showing ID to vote sounds reasonable. So when Democratic leadership comes out hard against it, they're not representing the people. They're representing an ideology and a political strategy, and it becomes party over people. And the argument from critics, whether you agree or not, is that modern Democrats benefit from loose rules, confusion, and gray areas. Because the messier the system is, the easier it is to win close elections and the harder it is to challenge outcomes. And again, you don't need to believe there's mass fraud everywhere to understand the clarity, the verification, and consistency build trust, right? Consistency builds trust. Just like, for example, with the whole Somali immigrant fraud that happened in Minnesota and Minneapolis, when it came to it happening under Governor Tim Walz's watch and Mayor Jacob Frey. Well, a lot of people seeing that fraud is taking place with fake daycares and fake nonprofits, such as, that was supposed to be feeding the children through COVID. A lot of people feel as though, why should we trust the system in regards to paying our taxes, thinking we're actually helping the people we are supposed to be helping, but it comes to happen, we are helping children that don't even exist in the name of fraud. And it's the same thing with elections, right? It's common sense. And the Democrats are fighting those things, makes people suspicious, especially when they can't clearly explain why voter ID in this case, which is the topic of the conversation, is supposedly bad while requiring ID for literally everything else in life. And that's why this Dana Bash moment matters, because she confronts Hakeem Jeffries literally with the poll and forces him into a corner where he has to acknowledge that the American people, including his own voters of the Democrat Party, don't agree with him. And that's when a mask slips off his face. Because instead of saying, okay, maybe we should listen, the response is usually deflection, moral grandstanding, or acting like common sense is somehow a threat to democracy. Which is wild, because democracy only works if people trust it. And trust doesn't come from vibes. It comes from rules that everyone understands and follows. And that's why this whole situation is such a loss and an L for the Democrats, because on an issue that should be easy, clear, and unifying, they somehow managed to end up on the opposite side of public opinion, looking out of touch, condescending, and disconnected from the very people they claim to represent. And that's the real reason this poll is blowing up, not because it proves one party is evil, right? But it proves, how can I put this? Not that one party is evil, but it proves the simple fact that how far political elites are from basic everyday common sense. That's what it's exposing. And that's what it proves. So now I want you guys to check this out.
I want to turn to a big debate about elections. The president said this week or this past week, that he wanted to nationalize elections at the White House and on Capitol Hill. They say that what they mean legislatively is pushing what they call the SAVE Act, which would mandate Americans show proof of citizenship, like a birth certificate, and also potentially more information about their registration to vote. Now, I understand you don't support things like a passport, for example, but requiring basic ID in order to vote is really popular. A Pew poll from a few months ago showed 83% of Americans, including 71% of your fellow Democrats, support requiring an ID to vote. Why are they wrong?
I haven't said that they're wrong. We know that states are the ones who are empowered to conduct elections, and every state should be allowed to decide the best way to proceed to ensure that there's a free and fair election. Here in New York, there are, in fact, voter identification requirements. The question is that what Republicans are trying to do is to engage in clear and blatant voter suppression. They know that if there's a free and fair election in November, they're going to lose. In fact, Republicans have been losing every single election since Donald Trump was sworn in January of last year, including most recently decisively in Texas, and of course, losing all across the country, up and down the ballot in the November off-year elections in places like New Jersey or Virginia or New York.
Yeah, and they've been losing. I mean, Virginia is a good example. They have a requirement to show your ID, and Democrats won very, very handily across the way. So why not maybe even just take that off the table and say, okay, maybe not a passport or birth certificate, but show ID?
Well, first of all, every state is empowered to be able to make the decision on their own, and we completely and totally support that. What Donald Trump wants to do is try to nationalize the election. Translation, steal it, and we're not going to let it happen. We stopped them in terms of their gerrymandering efforts, where they were going to try to redraw congressional maps in red states throughout the nation, not expect Democrats to respond forcefully, and try to rig the midterms. They failed. We've stopped Donald Trump from being able to federalize the National Guard, which we believe was probably part of some toxic attempt to unleash troops on American cities all across the nation and intimidate people from voting. And we're going to stop him from nationalizing the election. This is going to be a free and fair election. It's going to be conducted like every other election, where states and localities have the ability to administer the laws.
I do want to ask about a video that President Trump shared, a racist video, and it depicted former President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama as apes. About 12 hours later, the White House blamed a staffer for the post, removed it, but the president says he doesn't need to apologize because he didn't make a mistake.
He definitively needs to apologize. It was a disgusting video, and
Before we get there, since he wants to talk about the whole Obama thing when it came to the video, where it was like a millisecond or 6 seconds at the end of the video. But a lot of things that the Democrats don't want to talk about. Well, the very important thing of that video when I seen it, and I'll do a separate video on this, is in regards of majority of the video, and the main importance of the video was exposing the election fraud, the 2020 election. But they don't want to talk about that part, right? And the simple fact that the video where it had, Obama, former President Obama, and, Michelle Obama, his wife, basically were apes or whatever, but Joe Biden was a monkey, and it was all the theme of Lion King, but it seemed as though they were basically possibly whoever was the staffer of the White House seemed to be rushing and probably screen recorded and uploaded, but the importance was the election fraud in 2020. And here it goes again, the Democratic Party trying to tug on the heartstrings and emotions of individuals. Not to mention that this is the same Democratic Party where individuals have called him a orange chimpanzee and called and thrown insults at, President Donald Trump multiple times. And what I'm saying is within that matter is if you're going to throw insult for insult, you can't govern how someone else says something, but then you can throw an insult at them, but they can't throw an insult back. You're either going to have insults to insults, jokes on jokes, or we're not going to have them at all. As my mama would say, you're either going to play right when it came to my sibling, and when it came to my little sister, look, y'all either going to play appropriately or y'all not going to play at all, damn it. And that's how I was raised, and that's how I'm looking at this whole thing. Because at the end of the day, if you want to be realistic, when it comes to trying to make this a race thing, and black people is a history of black people and, slavery, and they basically called them, apes and monkeys originating from Africa. Well, a lot of animals have came from Africa, into this country of the United States of America, beautiful animals. But the simple fact is, most of individuals, when it comes to black culture, is nothing far more worse than black people basically bashing and putting down black people and competing with each other and killing each other on a daily basis. So I'm going to leave that right there. But as far as when it comes to what we're talking about, voter ID, because he basically, when you go back here, right,
elections. The president said this week that, or this past week, that he wanted to nationalize elections at the White House and on Capitol Hill. They say that what they mean legislatively is pushing what they call the SAVE Act, which would mandate Americans show proof of citizenship like a birth certificate and also potentially more information about their registration to vote. Now, I understand you don't support things like a passport, for example, but requiring basic ID in order to vote is really popular. A Pew poll from a few months ago showed 83% of Americans, including 71% of your fellow Democrats, support requiring an ID to vote. Why are they wrong?
I haven't said that they're wrong.
I wanted to really make sure you guys catch that. No, he have said that they are wrong. That's exactly what Hakeem Jeffries said, right? And I want to break down this part because this is where the whole thing goes from confusion to straight up insulting people's intelligence, right? Because the pushback here isn't just we disagree. It's literally, no, you are wrong. And not only are you wrong, you are racist, a sexist, and basically pro Jim Crow if you think people should show ID to vote. And I need everyone watching to understand how insane that accusation actually is in real life terms, because Democratic leadership has been saying very clearly, very consistently, is that supporting voter ID equals racism, right? Full stop. And they don't just say it casually, they frame it as voter suppression, Jim Crow 2.0, as Chuck Schumer would say. And all these heavy historical terms that are meant to shut down the conversation immediately. Because once you call somebody racist, the debate is over. Nobody's allowed to ask questions anymore. And here's the thing. If showing the ID is racist, then we got to keep that same energy across the board. Because you need an ID to work a job, to drive a car, to buy alcohol, to get into certain buildings, to apply for government benefits, to board a plane, to open a bank account. So all of those systems are racist too. Or is voting the only place where suddenly expecting proof of who you are is oppression? Because that logic doesn't survive contact with real life. And the insult here is that the argument assumes certain groups of people, usually minorities, are somehow incapable of getting an ID. Like they're lost, helpless, or too incompetent to handle basic adult responsibilities, when ironically ends up being, which ironically ends up being way more racist than just saying, hey, everyone should play by the same rules. And that's why this framing makes people mad, because it's not about protecting voters. It's about controlling the narrative. But don't take my word for it. I want you guys to see that the Democratic Party actually said that voter ID was oppression, Jim Crow 2.0, and it's racist.
What about the idea of voter ID, of photo ID being required to vote? Are you in favor of that? Can there be a compromise where Democrats and Republicans put forward photo ID as a requirement for voting?
So, Jonathan, what you've just asked is essentially Republicans have created distrust in the elections by making claims of non-existent fraud in the elections. And shouldn't we use the distrust they've created in order to enact a voter suppression law, which is the SAVE Act, which would require people to have a birth certificate or passport, documents that millions of Americans don't have. Almost half the country doesn't have a passport, and I don't know where many millions of people would even find a birth certificate. So
but I asked you
phony fraud claims.
Whoa. If you can't find a birth certificate, we got a problem, because that means you wasn't supposed to be in this country. Even when immigrants come over here and they try to finesse and they have kids in America, do naturalizations where their kids become American because they was born on American soil, they have a birth certificate. When my child was born, me and his mother wrote the name and the name that we chose, and within that, we got a birth certificate and a social security card, right? And you'll get a temporary birth certificate until the official one come in the mail and ship out to you to the address of where the child will be going home at. Get out of here with that. That's concerning.
But I was asking you a different question. Photo ID. Because as you know, let's show up, there was a recent poll, there's been a lot of polls on this, but in one recent Pew poll, 83% of adults support requiring photo ID to vote. 71% of Democrats favor requiring photo ID. Is that something that you can support? And if not, why not?
It's still going to be something, Jonathan. It's still going to be something that disenfranchises people that don't have the proper real ID, driver's license ID, that don't have the ID necessary to vote, even though they are citizens. This is another way to simply try to suppress the vote.
Jess, there's a new Pew Research poll that 95% of Republicans, but also 71% of Democrats like this idea. So why do you not?
It's Jim Crow 2.0, and I called it Jim Crow 2.0, and the right wing went nuts all over the internet. That's because they know it's true. What they're trying to do here is the same thing that was done in the South for decades to prevent people of color from voting. For instance, if you change, you're a woman who got married and changed your last name, you won't be able to show ID and you'll be discriminated against. If you can't find a birth certificate or a proper ID, you'll be discriminated against. This is vicious and nasty. And I said to our Republican colleagues, it will not pass the Senate. You will not get a single Democratic vote in the Senate. We're not reviving Jim Crow all over the country. And when the American people hear what exactly it is doing and what its intent is doing, they're going to be against it as well.
I was just going to say, I think Chuck Schumer was around in Senate probably during the Jim Crow era laws, because he seems to be surely not even pointing out the fact that it was his party that pushed that. Look, for them to call voter ID racist when you literally see the stats, even CNN was forced to report that both Black, Hispanic, Asian, white Americans want voter ID. I mean, it's literally as popular as banning insider trading. So I think we're on the right side of history on this one, and I think that Thune will do the right thing. Look, I wasn't lying to the American people. The president even said it today. He wants voter ID, and Thune said that he's bringing this to conference. So I think it's going to happen.
And you think you'll have, if it doesn't require the 60, you think you got the 50?
Well, look, the filibuster right now, there's nothing that's going to happen to remove the filibuster. The votes simply aren't there from Republican senators for that. However, the standing filibuster is a way to work through that and the workaround. And I do think right now there's a lot of very smart people in the Senate that are working on this, to include many senators that I've talked to. And I think the president's on board with it. So,
Leader Jeffries, you recently stated that requiring proof of citizenship to vote in elections is voter suppression. Can you explain how requiring proof of ID is voter suppression?
That's not a statement that I ever made.
You sure about that?
Then you should have brought the SAVE Act, which is a voter suppression bill that we strongly oppose, to the floor.
The man is a liar, man. Don't even know that the internet is forever. And they so used to playing games that they don't realize that the games catch up to you. You say one thing and say another thing. Typical politician, and that's why we love Donald Trump. He's not your typical politician. He's not even a career politician, but he says what it is. He does what he say he's going to do, and that's a man of honor. That's a man that's going to stand for something. These people are flaky. They're chameleons. They'll say anything that deals with controlling the narrative, like I said. And when leadership in the Democrat Party says their own voters are wrong, and not just wrong, but morally evil for holding a common sense belief, that's when you see the disconnect. Because remember, the poll shows that even Democrat voters support voter ID. So who exactly are you calling racist here? Your own base? Your own supporters? Your own communities? And the Jim Crow comparison, especially wild when you break it down, because Jim Crow laws were designed to stop people from voting entirely through literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, and violence. Whereas voter ID is literally just proves you are who you say you are, which is the bare minimum expectation in a modern society. And calling that sexism doesn't even make logical sense, unless the argument is that women somehow can't get IDs either, which again sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, and that's the core problem. Instead of explaining why voter ID is bad with evidence that holds up, the strategy has been to shame people into silence, because if you can make someone afraid of being labeled racist, they won't question you, they won't push back, and they won't notice that the argument doesn't actually add up. And regular people see through that, because in their daily lives, IDs aren't controversial. They are normal. They are expected. They are routine. So to make it like people are dumb and they don't have the wherewithal or the knowledge to be able to uphold or get an ID is mind blowing to me. And the Democrat Party is basically calling their own base and American people stupid and incapable. So when politicians act like this from one specific area, uh, should operate on vibes instead of verification, it raises eyebrows and it reinforces the feeling that this isn't somehow about fairness or access. It's about power, control, and winning at all cost. And that's why this moment matters, because once you strip away the buzzwords and the emotional manipulation, what's left is a simple question. If showing ID is reasonable everywhere else in society, why is voting the one place where asking for it suddenly makes you a villain? And the fact that the Democratic leadership can't answer that cleanly without attacking people tells you everything you need to know. And not to mention that I believe that even when it comes to our elections, I believe that there should be a federal holiday for it when it comes to our, national election, like presidential election, because then it would maximize the efforts for people to vote on top of voter ID for verification for individuals to say who they are. I believe that's a good thing, right? Because a lot of people can't get off. They work. They may cannot vote as they should. But if you really want people to get out there, why not make it a holiday? Just my suggestion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Or maybe that's too much. Let me know. As always, we just having a conversation. All right. So I want to get to not only the hypocrisy, right? Because this is where the math exposes to hypocrisy in a way you can't spin. Because what Democrats are literally doing right now is accusing their own voters of supporting Jim Crow, right? And that's not, you know, just numbers, right? Because when you look at the data, around 71% of Democrat voters support voter ID, meaning if Democrat leaders say voter ID is racist, Jim Crow, sexist, voter suppression, then by their own logic, they're saying the majority of their base is racist too, which I just thought about, which is insane because these are the same voters they campaign to, fundraise from, and claim to protect. So either voter ID isn't racist or Democrat leadership is openly assaulting their own supporters. And there's really no third option here. And this is why people are tuning out of political messaging, because the rhetoric doesn't match reality. And then we get to this other talking point that always pops up whenever election integrity comes up, which is nationalizing elections, right? And I got to be honest, this is one of my least favorite political buzzwords because it's used in the most dishonest way possible, because Democrats act like they're terrified of nationalized elections. Like Republicans are trying to federalize everything and destroy democracy, when in reality, Democrats already tried to nationalize elections, just in the opposite direction. And if you don't remember this, let me refresh your memory, right? Because when it came to a couple years ago under Joe Biden, Democrats pushed these massive voting rights bill or bills that would have forced every state to follow the same federal rules when it comes to voting, registration, mail-in ballots, ballot harvesting, and verification standards. That is literally what nationalizing election means. It just doesn't sound scary when they're the ones doing it. But don't take my word for it. Check it out.
The system does not work unless there is an unfettered right to vote. That is why the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is so central, because we have to repair the damage that was done by an out-of-control Supreme Court in 2013 with the Shelby versus Holder decision. This right-wing extremist Supreme Court in 2013 unleashed an epidemic of voter suppression in the United States of America. And the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is designed to address that epidemic and end it so that we can open up free and fair elections for every single American in every single zip code in this country.
Family, basically, instead of standardizing rules to tighten security, they want to standardize rules to loosen safeguards, making it harder for states to check eligibility, harder to clean voter rolls, harder to challenge questionable ballots, and harder to investigate fraud. That's basically what he's saying in translation. And the trick here is framing, because Republicans say national standards for ID and verification, and Democrats scream tyranny, but Democrats say national voting rights protections. And suddenly it's democracy saving, even though the end result is the federal government telling states how to run their elections. And that's the part they hope people don't connect, because it's it's the same mechanism, just a different outcome. Okay? And I'm going to say that again. So when it comes to Republicans saying national standards for ID and verification, and Democrats scream tyranny, right? They scream tyranny, racist, sexist, all that. But Democrats say national voting rights protections. And suddenly it's democracy saving. Even though the end result is the federal government telling states how to run their elections. Right? They don't want you to connect that, because it's the same mechanism, just different outcome. One, when it comes to the Republicans, tighten security for fair, accurate, efficient, effective elections. The other has safeguards to invite illegals to vote, to basically create another voter base without verification of who you are voting. You could just go in there with no voter ID in states like California, and you don't have to ask for ID. So when you really put it together, to simplify it and put it in simple words, this is why I say they don't actually care about nationalizing elections as a concept. They care about which direction the national rules go, the Democrat Party. Because when Republicans want uniform rules, they make elections more secure. It's framed as suppression from the Democrats, though. But when Democrats want uniform rules that reduce barriers and oversight, it's framed as inclusion, even though both are top-down federal control. And again, you don't need a political science degree to understand this. It's like if your boss says, "I don't like micromanagement," but then only complains when someone else is doing the managing, not when they are, because the issue isn't control, it's who controls it. And that's the core contradiction people are picking up on, because voters aren't stupid. They remember Democrats pushing hard to override state laws through federal voting bills, and now turning around and pretending they're defenders of states' rights and local control. And that's why this argument falls flat with normal people, because once you strip away the slogans and emotional language, what you're left with is a party that's fine with nationalized elections when it benefits them, furious about it when it doesn't benefit the Democrat Party, and willing to call even their own voters racist if that's what it takes to shut down a conversation they are losing. And that's my whole point when it comes to CNN and Dana Bash giving him the truth. That's what it is. That's why I had to play it in the beginning and play it again when it came to the voter ID with Dana Bash asking him on CNN, Hakeem Jeffries, about the voter ID. And if he disagreed, which we know he does, but he's trying to say he didn't say it. He said a lot of things he didn't say, but clearly he said it. Liar.
We know that states are the ones who are empowered to conduct elections, and every state should be allowed to decide the best way to proceed to ensure that there's a free and fair election. Here in New York, there are, in fact, voter identification requirements. The question is that what Republicans are trying to do is to engage in clear and blatant voter suppression. They know that if there's a free and fair election in November, they're going to lose. In fact, Republicans have been losing every single election since Donald Trump was sworn in January of last year, including most recently.
That's not true. That's not true. Because he's saying let me backtrack, right? Because he said two things I want to get to, and then I'm gonna close. This part right here really exposes how how fake the whole argument is with Hakeem Jeffries, because he's basically saying, you'll hear him say, and I quote, every state should be allowed to decide the best way to ensure a free and fair election, especially places like New York, right? And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. Sounds democratic. Sounds very let the people decide. But the problem is they don't actually believe that. Not consistently, not across the board. Because the second you bring up those so-called voting rights bills they tried to ram through Congress a couple years ago, that whole states rights argument magically disappears because those bills were literally designed to override state laws and force every state to follow the same federal rules, like I said, which is the definition of nationalizing elections. And when you look at it, Republicans are the one proposing standards they don't like, the Democrats. And that's where hypocrisy gets hilarious, because if Republicans say, hey, blue states should require to show voter ID, all of a sudden Democrats turn to the hardcore states, rights, absolutists overnight, right? Suddenly it's, whoa, 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 whoa. Let the states decide. You can't tell states what to do. But Democrats say, hey, every state should be forced to loosen voter verification, expand mail-in voting, and limit fraud checks. Then states' rights don't matter at all. Then this is about democracy. This is about protecting voters. And that flip-flop tells you everything, because principles don't change based on who's talking, only power does. That's the mind-blowing thing, right? It's hypocrisy, is manipulation 101 and all this stuff, man, because the stuff that he says blows my mind when it comes to the whole voter ID thing. And that's why people roll their eyes at this argument. I do, because it's like watching someone say, I hate rules, until the moment that they're the one writing them, and then suddenly rules are necessary. And that's what's so amazing about this whole thing, because they're not even trying to hide it anymore. These Democrats, they only believe in states' rights when it blocks Republican ideas. And they only believe in federal control when it advances Democratic ones. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Because this isn't about protecting democracy or respecting local control. It's about selectively applying whatever principle helps you win in at that moment. And regular people pick up on that instantly. Because in real life, consistency matters, right? And when your logic changes depending on who's holding the microphone, people stop taking you seriously. I don't take this man seriously. He's a joke. He's a clown in a circus, right? What happened when you're a clown? You should join the circus. And I think Hakeem Jeffries should join the circus. And then I want to touch on this next thing, because he said, and this is the last stretch right here, which completely falls apart. Comes out and says, Republicans have been losing every single election since Donald Trump was sworn in. And that's just flat out not true. Like, not even close to true. That's the kind of statement you make when you know your audience isn't going to fact check you, because Republicans have won plenty of races at the state level, local level, special elections, governorships, school boards, you name it. So saying every single election is just nonsense. And this is exactly why people don't trust political leaders or the media anymore. Mainstream liberal media at that. Mainstream media on top of it. Because nobody challenges obviously false claims of real time. And this is where Dana Bash comes in, and she should come in, because if she were a real journalist, instead of being so far left-leaning and being a radical left lunatic, being so biased, instead of just reporting the truth and seeking the truth and seeking letting the answer speak for itself on whatever he stands on, exposing his own hypocrisy as such of a liar, a bad liar he is. No, she just let him. You realize when it comes to CNN and Dana Bash and Abby Phillip and all these individuals on CNN, they allow these Democrats to go on long tangents. They don't rebuttal them. They don't stop them. But let a Republican do it. Let Donald Trump do it. Let JD Vance do it. Anybody in the Trump administration. Oh, wait. They wanna bunker down. But you see, she's not doing that with Hakeem Jeffries, right? And it tells you all you need to know, because Dana Bash should have came in as a real journalist, which we know she's not, instead of a Democrat Party mouthpiece. The obvious follow-up question would be very simple and devastating. Okay, you're crying and throwing up over nationalized elections right now, but what was the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? What was that supposed to be? Because that literally was an attempt to nationalize election by forcing federal rules onto every state. And that's the question that never gets asked, because it exposes a double standard immediately. And that's the part they don't want viewers to connect. Because apparently it's only bad to nationalize elections when Republicans want to do something that 71% of Democrats support. 83% of Americans support, and around 90% of Republicans support, which is voter ID. But it's totally fine to nationalize elections when Democrats want to pass legislation that make it harder to verify voters, harder to clean voter rolls, harder to investigate fraud. Because let's stop dancing around it. When you reduce oversight and verification, you increase the opportunity to cheat. That's not controversial. That's common sense. That's true in school testing. It's true in taxes. It's true in sports. And the hypocrisy here is so loud, it's almost impressive because Hakeem Jeffries is throwing a tantrum over something Democrats tried to do literally a couple years ago under former President Joe Biden. Just the opposite direction. And the media just lets it slide, which is why people call this propaganda, an agenda, not journalism. And that's why this dude comes off like a clown in a circus he should be in, as he is. Because he's making arguments that collapse the second you apply them consistently. And nobody in the room is willing to push back and slow this fool down and say, wait. But you actually was pushing for nationalized elections, right? And it makes me wonder, and this is just speculation. I'm not saying this is true. This is all alleged. It makes me wonder that these Democrats, it's like CNN only exists because they're getting paid from the payroll of the Democrat Party. It makes me believe that. I'm not saying it's true. There's no facts of this. There's no proof of this. This is my opinion. We're having a conversation, okay? Want to put that out there. But look, when you look at it and you see all of this mess, regular people understand this instinctively. And you also shut down the nonsense because once voter ID is the law, the conversation changes and you remove one of the biggest sources of distrust in the system, which is exactly why Democrats fight it so hard. And yet, knowing how politics works, it honestly makes no sense that Republicans might not even do it because whenever something is this logical, this popular, and this easy to explain, somehow it never gets done, but it's still a conversation worth having. Because the more people hear it broken down like this, the harder it gets for politicians and the media to keep selling obvious contradictions with a straight face.
Decisively in Texas, and of course, losing all across the country, up and down the ballot in the November off-year elections in places like New Jersey or Virginia or New York.
I'm gonna leave it there, man. I can't take it no more. He gives me a freaking headache. This man is just a fool. I really hoped they pass voter ID. I pray for it. I really do. I really pray that they pass voter ID. Because what's happening is, and I need the Republicans and, John Thune to really bunker down, right? And seal the deal. Because you listen to this guy, you got to ask yourself, is anything he's saying actually come from his own brain? Or he's just reading lines off a teleprompter? But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I'm going to leave it there. Peace.